My name's Kanji, and welcome to Crimson Leaves Photography. So today we're going to start out talking about Fujifilm. I used to shoot Nikon for about 8 years. I did weddings, events, portraits, you name it. And they were great. But then I found Fujifilm. And the reason I went to Fujifilm is because they were one of the companies that really made mirrorless cameras really popular, in my opinion, starting with the Fujifilm X-T1 back in 2012, I think. But anyway, the advantage to mirrorless cameras is there's no mirror that flips up and down like a DSLR camera. And what that means is there's less moving parts, there's less complex moving parts, and it is easier to add vintage lenses onto these. You can actually get an adapter and put a lens from the 1970s on here and get a vintage look if you wanted. And some of the lenses from the 70s, 80s, 90s, some of them are amazing, and they're dirt cheap too. So that's why I went to Fujifilm. The other reason I went to Fujifilm is because any camera you get from them, there are things called film simulations, and either before you take the picture or after you take the picture, you can actually make your image look like the type of film that was used and produced by Fujifilm in the past, when all there was film. We're talking about the 80s and 90s. So if you want to add a film look to your images, you have the option with these. And I love that. Sometimes, for commercial work, I don't want it to look like film. For portraits, I may. So to have that option is just awesome. Alright folks, so the first thing I recommend you want to try to decide on is what size camera do you want. This can be an important factor down the road, maybe not right now, but if you only have one camera and you're going to an exotic place on vacation, you might say to yourself, I kind of wish I got a smaller camera because I have to pack all this other stuff and I don't want to be carrying a bigger camera. So there are different series. First of all, we have the XA series. The XA right here, that is their smallest series. They have no viewfinder. They do have an LCD screen on the back, and that's to keep down on the size, obviously. This thing is super light, maybe 1/4 of a pound. I mean, it's crazy how light this thing is, and this does 4K. We'll get more into features later, but the XA is a great travel camera, very high quality images, of course, some great features in a small package, but no viewfinder. Okay, now next we go to the XT series. The XT series, they all will have a viewfinder on the back and an LCD. Now if it has 2 digits in the name, like 20 or 30, that means it's the small version of the XT series. So compared to the XA7, you can see they're very similar in size. XT20 is a little bit taller. It's a little bit thinner. Or I'm sorry, the XA is a little bit thinner. But it also has some more controls on top. So XT is the next grade up. But it's smaller than the more expensive models. So XT is like the middle the middle priced, more features than the XA. These are a great choice. So the XT, you also get a flippable LCD depending on the model. Some are fully articulating. Alright, so 4K video, 24 megapixel on both these. Alright, next. So if it has a 3-digit number after the T, like XT100, XT200, these are slightly inexpensive versions of what I just showed you. The XT20 has two digits after the T. The 3 digits is a little bit cheaper, but they have some cool features. So they're less expensive because the materials they use are not as high quality, and you can feel it, but they're still made very well. But even though this is advertised as a lesser expensive model, or series rather, look at this. It has a fully articulating screen, still does 4K video, has the viewfinder, 24 megapixel. So anything with 3 digits also means it is not Fujifilm's higher end sensor. It's the same megapixels, but it's a different design. It's called a Bayer sensor. Personally, I think in bright light, Bayer sensor is sharper, but in low light, the X-Trans sensor is definitely better. And that's from years of me pixel peeping, zooming in, seeing thousands of images with both series. So that's the XT200. Here's its older brother, the XT100. The 100, just the 4K video was only at 15 frames per second, so it's really choppy. But same sensor, just better performance out of this one for video, and better processor. Alright, but other than that, same features. Alright, so now we're going to talk about the XE2 or the XE series in general. It started out with the XE1, of course. Now they're up to an XE4. The XE series is just a rectangular design. This design is called a rangefinder design. It's supposed to look like more of a retro design. I know the other cameras look retro as well, but there was back in the day there were film cameras called rangefinders, and they looked similar to this, just very rectangular and wider. Also, the viewfinder is in the corner here instead of on the top in the middle, so if you don't want your nose pressing against the screen, you want the viewfinder closer to your eye, then that might be a benefit for you. But the XE series, you can't flip the screen out. It's fixed in there. But that's okay. I mean, just what your needs are. So, compared to the XA series, I mean, it's noticeably bigger. It is. It's going to feel a lot bigger in your hands. Honestly, I think the XE series is going to feel more comfortable in your hand to most people than the XA series. But it's preference. You really want to try it out. Hold the camera in your hand before you decide. Alright, next we have their highest end series. It's any of the cameras that have a single digit after the T. That's going to be their higher end series. So this is the XT4. They also have an XT5 out now. X-T4 has a 26 megapixel. All the other ones I showed you were a 24 megapixel. Too many megapixels, by the way, is bad for low light, because the more pixels you have, the smaller the pixels are, so they're more difficult to collect light. And the more light you get into the camera sensor, the better quality images you will have. So 26 is still, not too much. So it's a good balance of low light performance and high resolution. So let's compare this to the XA series. And man, that's quite a difference, isn't it? Now, it does have, of course, a fully articulating LCD screen. What I mean by that is it flips out and then it rotates, so any angle you need. The XA7 has that too, even though it's a quarter of the price, which is pretty cool. So, do you lose any quality going from an XT20 to an XT4 or an XT2? Not really. And that's what's awesome about Fujifilm, in my opinion. Nikon, Sony, Canon, they're all great too, honestly. But I like the film simulations. So what you get in the single digit, their highest end series with Fujifilm, is this body on this is weather resistant, not weatherproof. So if you go into very humid areas, I don't care what brand you have, if it is weather resistant, it will not protect against high humidity, just water droplets and rain, stuff like that, sand, dust, for a limited time. Could be 1 hour, could be 2 hours. It just depends on where the rain falls. Supposedly Fujifilm says you can accidentally pour water on the camera and it should be fine, but who wants to test that, right? So obviously with the XT single digit series, you're going to get bigger dials, more controls, more buttons. Look, there's a extra button there on the front that you can customize. You can customize all these buttons on the back. So comfort, also with the higher end cameras, since it's a larger camera, they might as well put a good grip on it, right? And that's what they do. The grip is very important. And that's why I bought one specifically for this XT200. Alright, folks. So, if you're into video, usually the higher series is going to give you better video quality. Image quality is going to be about the same, because video is a whole different ball of wax. Video quality has to do with many things, not just the sensor. It has to do with what's called bit rate and processing and file format. Okay, so image quality, any of these cameras are going to be awesome. Video quality, that's probably when you want to consider getting a higher end series like the XT20, XT30, XT2, XT3, XT4. Alright, so if you want detailed specifications on these, just go to Fujifilm's website. If you need help deciding on, between two specific models or several, feel free to comment below. If you have just general questions about photography and Fujifilm, feel free to comment. Pretty much any camera, with an interchangeable lens like these, where you can remove the lens, in the past 5 to 10 years is going to have good to great image quality. I mean, superb. It's hard to find an interchangeable lens camera without good quality. So it really isn't much of a concern anymore. Now, if you're really into, I need the absolute best quality, well, that has to do with settings more than the sensor. And it also has to do with what kind of lens you got. So in terms of image quality, any of these are going to be awesome. Now, some are slightly better than others, but when you're printing stuff, you're not going to notice. Unless you have a super high res monitor and your clients are looking at the pictures on those, maybe. But the average computer monitor, you're not going to see the difference, and any of these will produce professional images. Alright folks, so the next thing I want to talk about is sensor size. There are many different sensors. This is the sensor right there, that rectangle. That is what detects light and creates the image. The larger the sensor, the more light it can collect through the lens, which produces a higher quality image. Now, you would think that more light going into the camera means you would get a brighter image, right? Wrong. The reason being, your camera, if it's on, semi-automatic or fully automatic settings, it's always trying to get you the correct brightness, also known as exposure to photographers. And so therefore, if you put a camera on auto mode and turn up the brightness of a flashlight on something you're photographing, if you're watching on the LCD screen, it'll look brighter for a second, but then it'll automatically adjust it to make it look like it did before, normal. Sometimes it gets stuff wrong, but 95% of the time, cameras are pretty darn good at getting you correct exposure. So, the larger sensor collects more light, higher quality images because of that. You also get more background blur with, let's say you were to put a lens from a smaller sensor onto a camera with a bigger sensor, the same lens, you would get more background blur with the larger sensor. And it's just physics, it's the way it's designed. And then if you got a smaller sensor, you'd get less background blur with that lens. So Fujifilm uses what's called APS-C size sensors. It's a good middle ground size. That's why I like it. It's great quality without the cost of full frame, which is the next step up in size. And then the biggest size is medium format. Those are like 140 megapixel cameras. Full frame, you're looking at usually 40 megapixel, 50. APS-C, of course, I'm sure you've seen, are 24 megapixel, 240. Now the next step below this in size is micro four thirds. Those are made by Panasonic and Olympus. And honestly, they're really good too. I mean, if you were to print out images between micro four thirds and APS-C in the daytime, it'd be very hard to tell. If you're in low light situations and you don't do any editing, yeah, you might be able to tell there's more artifacts in the micro four thirds, or it's a little bit more noisy. It might be noticeable, but you'd have to kind of look fairly hard. So they are a little bit cheaper, but not much. So, and some of those cameras are a bit smaller, but not all of them. So that's why I went with Fujifilm as well. They're small for an APS-C size sensor. And then of course there's point and shoot cameras, which are going to have the smallest. Cameras that don't have a removable lens, also known as an interchangeable lens. An example is the Sony RX100 series. Any lens that is not removable is going to have probably a 1-inch sensor, is what they call it, or lower. Alright guys, the next thing I want to talk about is menu system. So every brand has a menu system that people like, that people hate. So I like Fujifilm because it's pretty easy to figure out once you get the basics down. So up here on all their cameras, pretty much they have a Q button. And that's the quick menu. So if I tap that, this is all customizable. This tile display here. What I have is I can switch between different custom modes. I have my how much of the sensor do I want to have my autofocus detect. I have my dynamic range. I have my white balance, which is my tint and my hue of my pictures before I take them. I have my noise reduction, which is how clean do I want my images? Do I want them noisy for a more film look or not? I have the file size. I have my file quality. Here's my film simulations that I was telling you guys about earlier. This is highlight tone, which is, if there's a high contrast situation like bright sky and a dark ground for landscapes, if I want to make sure I get those clouds in the picture and show the detail of those, I want to lower my highlight tone. So mine's always at -2 because I always want to protect the highlights so they're not all white. I also have shadow tone. I leave that at -1. That's how dark your shadows are. -1 means my shadows are not as dark as normal. And then if I want to change my mind later, I can do that in editing. How much color or saturation is in the shot, and how sharp I want the picture to be. Too sharp is not good for portraits, so it's nice to be able to adjust that. And then I have a timer here, if I want a 10-second timer, face and eye detection, and how bright I want my LCD. So tons of stuff in the quick menu, and I can customize those, rearrange them, change them to many other things in the menu. And of course you have your standard menu here. I have each category and then the subcategories over there. If I want to go to a subcategory, I just press right to go to the right and select the subcategory, or I can press OK. And once I choose something, I can press OK or back, the left button I mean. And then when I'm done, and that's it. I am also a camera reseller, by the way. So if you are interested in any of these models and you want a discount, I do have these for sale on Facebook Marketplace. I'll put the link below. And if you message me and say you found me on YouTube, I will give you a discount. I just want to thank you guys so much for joining me today. I hope my information was helpful, of course. I love helping people out with photography. If you need help deciding on a camera, I will do my best. Please comment below. If you like my channel, this is a new channel, I'd appreciate a subscription or a like or both. No pressure. Again, comment if you want to just talk about photography and Fujifilm or anything else. I hope you guys have a great day.